Hello, thank you. Thank you.
How many of you? 13.
Yeah, 13.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
In the hills of northern Thailand, nestled in a forested region near the border with Myanmar, lies a cave that few outside the country had ever heard of, until it became the center of one of the most extraordinary rescue missions the world has ever witnessed. It all began on the afternoon of June 23, 2018. The skies were gray, the kind of heavy monsoon clouds that signal more than just rain. They signaled change. 12 boys aged 11 to 16 from a local football team called the Wild Boars finished practice and hopped on their bikes with their assistant coach, a 25-year-old named Ekapol Chanawong. They rode through the muddy paddies of Chiang Rai, splashing through puddles, their laughter echoing as they headed up into the mountains. The plan wasn't to go far, just a quick exploration of Tham Luang Nang Nan Cave. It wasn't their first time there. In fact, this cave was a familiar spot, a kind of rite of passage that they'd write names on the cave wall, bonding through adventure. They parked their bikes at the mouth of the cave, stashed their shoes and bags, turned on their torches, and went in. Hours later, those bikes still sat there untouched. Back at home, a birthday cake remained uneaten. One of the boys, Knight, had turned 17 that day. His family had prepared presents, a SpongeBob SquarePants cake. He was supposed to come back and celebrate, but the hours stretched into the night. Parents began to call. No answers. Panic crept in. Calls turned into frantic messages. Group chats lit up with worried questions. And soon enough, the small village of Mai Sai felt a collective unease. Some parents grabbed flashlights and headed toward the hills themselves. Nightfall brought no comfort, only deeper worry. The forest loomed wet and silent as anxious families gathered near the cave entrance. Mothers clutched photos of their sons. Fathers stood still, listening for sounds, anything. Villagers began lighting incense, offering prayers to the cave's guardian spirit. A quiet understanding spread through the crowd. Something was very wrong. No one had expected the rains to come this early. The monsoon usually started in July, not June, but this year the skies had other plans. A few elders in the village whispered about how Tham Luang was sacred and how no one should disturb it once the rains had begun. Still, hope hadn't faded. Not yet. Maybe the boys had just gotten lost. Maybe they were huddled somewhere dry, waiting for the storm to pass. The first flashlight beams pierced the cave's darkness later that evening, but all they found were muddy paths and rising water. Searchers called out into the echoing chambers. No response. The sense of urgency began to grow. The realization was setting in. This was no ordinary delay. Something much larger, something far more dangerous was unfolding deep within the mountain. The head coach, Noparat Kanthawong, received a flood of missed calls. None of the boys were answering. When he reached out to another player who hadn't gone on the cave trip, the story became clear. The team had gone exploring in Tham Luang. He raced to the cave entrance. What he found sent chills down his spine. Bicycles, backpacks, football shoes, and a slow trickle of muddy water emerging from the cave's mouth. Inside, the boys had ventured deep, about 4 kilometers into the cave. They had passed a spot known as Pattaya Beach, usually dry during this time of year. But the rain had arrived earlier than expected. Water filled the cave at terrifying speed, cutting off their exit. Their flashlights flickered in the damp dark. They had no idea how deep the water would get or how long they'd be stuck. Their way out was gone. Behind them, flooded passageways. In front of them, darkness and uncertainty. They retreated deeper and deeper until they found a small rock shelf just above the rising water. Here, they dug into the rock with stones, carving out space to huddle together and conserve warmth. They were scared, hungry, and unsure how long they'd be there, but they had one another, and they had their coach. Ekapol, once a Buddhist monk, guided them through meditation, helping the boys remain calm, slow their breathing, conserve energy, and suppress fear. They had no food, but moisture dripped from the cave walls, providing enough water to survive. They stayed quiet. They stayed together. In total darkness, they waited. The minutes blurred into hours, and hours into days. Time lost all meaning inside the cave. Some of the boys would later say they thought only 2 or 3 days had passed. It had actually been 9. To pass the time, they shared stories, whispered jokes, and leaned on one another. Coach Ake kept them in a circle, huddled tightly for warmth. Every movement was deliberate, every word careful. He reminded them not to panic, to trust the silence, and to let their bodies rest. Hunger gnawed at them, but panic would have been worse. At times, the cave groaned around them, drips echoing like footsteps, the sound of shifting rocks keeping them on edge. Some tried digging further into the shelf with bits of rock, carving out a space to feel more secure. They drank sparingly from the mineral-rich water trickling down the walls, careful not to take too much. Flashlights grew dimmer, batteries running low. Still, the boys remained hopeful. When one began to lose spirit, the others would encourage him, reassure him that someone was coming. They believed someone would find them. They had to. In the stillness of the cave, they built a small world of quiet determination. Every breath was a choice to survive. Back outside, a frantic rescue effort began. Parents stood vigil at the entrance, offering prayers and gifts to the spirit said to protect the cave. Within hours, Thai Navy SEALs, police, volunteers, and local villagers swarmed the area. Rescue workers found footprints inside the cave, but beyond that, nothing. The cave was vast, stretching nearly 10 kilometers beneath the limestone mountain range known as Doi Nang Non, the Mountain of the Sleeping Lady. It was slippery, narrow, pitch black, and flooded in many sections. The warning sign at the entrance had been clear: do not enter during the rainy season, and now the rains were falling relentlessly. Rescuers pumped water out of the cave using everything from heavy-duty pumps to buckets. Helicopters airlifted equipment to the mountain. Farmers willingly let their fields be flooded to divert water. Volunteers cleaned muddy toilets. Laundry shops washed wet clothes for divers at no charge. Villagers brought free food and drinks. Hope grew with every passing hour, but the boys were still missing. Searchers were working blind. On June 28th, international rescuers began arriving. U.S. Air Force specialists flew in from Okinawa. British divers from the Elite Cave Rescue Council joined the search. Divers from China, Australia, Belgium, and more followed. Among them were British divers John Valanthan and Rick Stanton, some of the most experienced cave divers in the world. Alongside Belgian diver Ben Reminence, they pushed deeper into the cave than anyone had gone so far, laying guide ropes as they fought against zero visibility and strong currents. On July 2nd, 9 days after the boys had gone missing, something incredible happened. Volanthan and Stanton surfaced in an air pocket beyond the flooded Pattaya Beach chamber. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then, the sound, shuffling, movement, a smell, stale, human. Then, their lights revealed faces, thin, pale, but alive. One of the divers asked, "How many of you?" A boy's voice answered, 13. The diver paused, then said, "Brilliant." That single word echoed around the world. The footage of that moment spread like wildfire. Huddled together on a narrow shelf, wrapped in emergency blankets, each boy took a turn saying, "Sawati Krap," the traditional Thai greeting. They smiled. They were alive, but they were far from safe. Rescuers now faced an even bigger challenge: how to get them out. The path in was treacherous. The water was cold, visibility near zero. Many of the boys didn't even know how to swim. The narrowest passage in the cave measured just 15 inches wide. The trip in took 6 hours. The trip out would be harder. At first, some experts considered waiting for the rainy season to end. That meant keeping the boys in the cave for up to 4 months. But oxygen levels were dropping inside, measured at just 15%, well below the safe threshold. One Thai Navy SEAL compared the situation to being on a plane that was slowly losing air. Then came the worst news yet. On July 6th, during a dive to deliver oxygen tanks, former Navy SEAL Saman Kunan lost consciousness. His dive buddy tried to revive him, but he couldn't be saved. Saman died inside the cave. He had volunteered for the mission, having left the Navy years before. At the time of his death, he was working as a security officer at an airport. He had no obligation to be there. He simply came to help. His funeral was sponsored by the Thai royal family. His widow, Wallyporn, later said he had always believed in living life fully. He had told her once, "We never know when we're going to die, so we must cherish every day." His death shook the team. If a trained SEAL couldn't make it, how could children? The next day, the boys and their coach wrote letters to their families. Smiley faces, hearts, apologies, love. One asked his teacher not to assign too much homework. Coach Ake's letter was filled with remorse, but the parents responded only with gratitude. They thanked him for keeping the boys safe. With more rain looming, the window to act was closing fast. Doctors, divers, and international experts devised a plan, unprecedented, risky, and controversial. The boys would be sedated, not just calmed, but fully unconscious. An anesthetist, Dr. Richard Harris from Australia, was brought in. He and his dive partner, Craig Challen, trained the team to inject the sedative mid-dive if needed. Each boy was fitted with a full-face diving mask, a buoyancy aid, and clipped to a diver. An oxygen tank was strapped to the front of each child, and they were held face down to ensure water wouldn't flood the mask. The diver's head was kept higher than the boys to absorb any collision with cave walls. It was, in the diver's words, like transporting a package. At every stage, lives hung in the balance. The rescue began on July 8th. 18 divers entered the cave. The first 4 boys were sedated, masked, and guided out one by one. At each chamber, the boys were transferred, carried, dragged, or floated. In Chamber 3, hundreds of rescuers formed a human chain to pass them out to safety. They reached the hospital in Chiang Rai alive. On July 9th, 4 more were pulled out. The operation became smoother, faster. Then on July 10th, the last 4 boys and their coach made the journey. Behind them, the Thai SEALs and Dr. Harris stayed to ensure everyone got out. As the final divers prepared to exit, a water pump failed. Water rushed in, rescuers sprinted. They escaped just in time. All 13 had made it out. Across Thailand, people cheered, monks chanted, schools prayed, social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag thank you, hashtag heroes, hashtag hooyah. The boys were hospitalized in isolation at first, wearing sunglasses to adjust to daylight. They'd lost weight but were in remarkably good shape. Some had minor lung and eye infections, but nothing critical. Coach Ak had given his food to the boys, encouraged them to drink only clean water, and kept them calm. Parents called him a hero. Meanwhile, tributes poured in for Saman Kunan. A bronze statue was erected outside the cave, showing him with 13 wild boars at his feet. Later, another diver, Beirut Pakbara, who had also joined the mission, died from a blood infection contracted during the rescue. The Wild Boars' story didn't end with the rescue. They were invited to international football matches. They met stars, toured stadiums. They visited the UK, Argentina, and Olympic events. The cave was turned into a museum and eventually reopened to visitors, with ropes, oxygen tanks, and displays showing what the rescue team had endured. Some of the original bikes the boys left behind are still parked at the cave's entrance. 3 of the boys and Coach Ake had been stateless, members of tribal communities without official citizenship. After the rescue, Thai officials granted them nationality. In 2023, on the 5th anniversary of the rescue, visitors gathered again at Tham Luang to remember what happened. The cave had become more than just a place. It had become a symbol of resilience, of unity, of hope. It was never supposed to be more than a birthday outing. But what unfolded in those caves, through sweat, sacrifice, global teamwork, and one unforgettable brilliant, became a story the world will never forget. And maybe that's the point, that in the darkest places, sometimes it's the light of strangers, the divers, the farmers, the medics, the volunteers, that shows the way out. 13 inches in, 13 inches out, alive, and for Saman Kunan, never forgotten. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in the impossible. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories that show what humanity is capable of when it comes together.